Hey there, this is DIY Life Guide coming at you, and today I'm going to be talking to you about the concept of external insulation. And external insulation takes place when you have insulating properties that are taking place outside of the framing and the sheathing of the house. So the sheathing and the framing are within the insulated area of the house. And the reason that external insulation has become more popular nowadays is because of the concept of thermal bridging. And it's a lot more efficient to have external insulation to stop thermal bridging from happening. Thermal bridging happens in a traditional house when you have insulation stuffed in between the studs of the house. In the stud bays of the house, you have a part that is uninsulated. So you have the stud of the house, which can carry heat or coldness from the outside sheathing of the house to the interior connected to the drywall. And wood is a very bad insulator. You don't really want to have wood trying to insulate the house. So the solution is to have an external insulation, which makes a continuous layer of insulation outside of the framing of the house. That way the thermal mass of the house itself, all the framing and the sheathing, will be within a conditioned space, meaning it's going to be either heated or cooled. And the advantage of this is that that thermal mass will hold on to the heating or the cooling of within the house, and also it will be less thermal bridging between the outside as well. So this is a much more efficient way of doing insulation, even though it may be more work and can be more expensive. But in my video today, I'll be explaining to you how I installed external insulation for cheap. Oftentimes when you're building with an external insulation, it's going to be more expensive because the materials are specialty materials that are typically used for external insulation. But I just use regular interior mineral wool batts in order to externally insulate the house. Let's get started. So just to give you a little view, this right here, I'm underneath the house, and this is the outer siding of the house, this corrugated metal, and in here is the sheathing. And on the outside, on a continuous layer all the way on all sides of the house and on the roof of the house, is external insulation. In my experience, the two products that people traditionally use to externally insulate a house are either sheets of foam board or Roxol mineral wool sheet. And these two products, because they're so specialized for external insulation, these products can typically cost a lot more per square foot, and thus can make externally insulating expensive. And for me, what I did, my solution to that is to use mineral wool batts. So just regular R15 mineral wool batts that you would put into a wall cavity. I'm actually using to blanket the outside of this house. And the way I was able to pull this off is I was able to use a battening system to stack the mineral wool batts on top of each other, and then I was able to batten them down to the side of the house. That way they hold in place and they don't fall down. And then on the underside of here, I actually have this screening product, if you can see that right there. And this is a screen that will stop any bugs from getting in here and will keep the wall free of any pests. If you look at the per square foot cost of R15 mineral wool batts relative to, say, sheets of the XPF foam board, or say, the Roxol sheets, you can tell it's a lot cheaper, and it's not considered a specialty product. It's just regular mineral wool batts. All right, so this is the continuous layer of insulation that runs on the outside of the house, on all sides and on the roof of the house. Down here, tucked behind this metal wall right here, this is my corrugated metal siding that I had. And the reason that I decided to use this is because when I was going to batten down the mineral wool batt, I needed a light and durable siding to attach to the battens, and I didn't want to choose anything too heavy. Corrugated metal is very high performance material, so it made sense for me to use that to attach it to the battens. battens. So as you can see, these screws, they run along a straight line here. And underneath here is a batten, which is basically just a strip of wood that you use with lag screws, which are really long screws. I use 6-inch long screws, and I was able to screw down the wooden battens, which are just strips of wood. It's plywood cut into 6-inch wide strips. So the plywood's 8 foot long, but it's about 6 inches wide. And the batten is just supposed to hold the mineral wool bat to the house itself. And I was able to stack the battens up in rows along the house, and then I was able to screw down these battens over the mineral wool bats so it held it to the house and it wasn't going to move. So the first step is you want to add a bug screen at the bottom of the house there, and that attaches to the joist underneath the house. And the bug screen is just supposed to go over the mineral wool bats at the bottom. That way no bugs crawl into the cavity of the wall itself. So you want to start with the bug screen at the bottom, and then you can start stacking rows of mineral wool bats on top of each other, starting at the bottom, and then you can stack them one row at a time. And then once you get up to, say, maybe 6 rows of battens, then you can start installing the battens loosely over the mineral bats to hold them in place. As I mentioned, the battens will be connected down to the house with 6-inch long screws, and the screw is supposed to go through the width of the mineral wool bat, and then it will go into the stud of the house a few inches. So ultimately you're going to have a batten that is got a screw that is connecting it to the frame of the house. That way you can hang weight onto these battens, and the battens themselves will actually hold the mineral wool bat to the house. That way it will hold it together, but also give you a structure to attach the siding on the outside of the house. When you're screwing the screws through the battens and trying to find studs, it can be a bit of a challenge. So it's really just trial and error. Eventually you'll figure out where the studs are just based on the sheathing of the house, and you can tell that, hey, this is an edge of a sheathing, this is an edge of a sheathing. Clearly there's a stud underneath these 2 edges where they were nailed in, and you'll be able to figure out where to actually screw the batten into the stud of the house. Also, you can go around to the inside of the house and double check your work to make sure that the screws didn't miss the stud and just go directly into the sheathing of the house. It's really important that each screw goes directly into the framing of the house. As mentioned, you're going to be attaching the battens to the house with those screws, so make sure you don't over tighten the screw, because that will end up compressing the mineral wool bat to the house, and any type of compression of the bat will result in lower R value. Once you get all of the mineral wool bats installed up to the end of the 8-foot long strip, you're going to need to obviously cut some shorter strips for up there. So for example, this is a 13-foot long wall, and then this side is 8 foot. So I was able to get a whole wall worth of mineral wool battened down on this side because it's 8 foot. But over here, I was gonna have to add some battens to the top there to cover the gap of any of the battens that are being held above 8 foot. You wanna make sure when you are installing exterior mineral wool bats that there's no gaps between any of the bats that you install, and the bat itself will just butt up against the L flashing around the windows. Once you install the external insulation for an entire wall, you're going to want to go over each one of the battens that you installed and make sure that they're flat with the other battens. So for example, this would be a batten right here, this right here would be a batten, and then over here, see my hand, this all the way up would be a batten. So you want to make sure these 2 battens are lined up with each other and are flat, so that way when you lay the siding onto the house, it will appear flat and look nice. The process for laying mineral wool bats on the roof is the same as the process for laying them in the sides of the house. You can lay them flat on the roof here and then use the batten strips to hold it down to the roof, and then ultimately you just lay your corrugated metal or roofing material on top of that. So there's two main advantages of using external insulation, and the first is the energy savings. Typically when you're rating insulation in a house, you're considering what insulation level you have within the stud bays. So if you have R15 bats in the walls, typically it's just considering it in between the stud bays. But when you consider that this same insulation is on the outside now and it's covering all of the stud bays and it's blocking any thermal bridging, it becomes much stronger than just putting the bat in the stud bay. The second advantage of external insulation is that this allows you to have the stud bays of the house open on the inside. So normally if you were insulating a house internally, you would put insulation between the stud bays. But if all your insulation is on the outside of the house, that gives you the option of not having to insulate your stud bays. And thus you can actually leave those stud bays open and create more space for the house and turn it into a design feature of the house that your stud bays are open, and you can actually paint your stud bays and make that the actual walling of the house.